Hey, what's up everybody? This is the Helpful Hacker, and today we are going over the Nmap The Basics room from TryHackMe. So we'll jump right in and get started with task number 1, the introduction. So this is just going to give a quick intro to Nmap, and pretty much Nmap is just a super awesome, kind of honestly all-encompassing tool for scanning networks and scanning hosts. And so what that means is if you have a network with, let's say, 5 computers on it, Nmap can scan the network and determine how many computers are on the network, so it would find those 5 computers, and then you can use Nmap to actually scan each one of those hosts and see which ports they have open and which services they have running on each port that is open. And then you can even figure out the version of those services and other stuff like that. So super useful tool. They give you this long 3-4 paragraph thing telling you a little bit about it. They talk about ARP scan, ping scans, or ping ARP scans, and telnet, and how you could potentially use those to do some of the things that Nmap does, but Nmap will do them better. It'll do them more efficiently. So that's really the go-to tool that people use in IT and cybersecurity for this kind of stuff. So read through all that, make sure you kind of understand it. And then the actual learning objectives is we're going to learn how to use Nmap to discover live hosts on a network, find running services, figure out which different types of port scans Nmap can do for us, because it can do lots of different scans. And we're going to look at figuring out version numbers for running services, and then controlling the timing of the scan and formatting the output of a scan. So that's what we'll go over. It recommends that you have your network fundamentals down. So these are the rooms it recommends you have done. If you haven't, make sure to check out those rooms. I have full walkthroughs of all of them on my channel, so you can check those out there as well. And with that, the question, not a real question, so read through that, mark complete, and then you're done with task number 1. Now it's on to task number 2, host discovery. So as I said, host discovery, Nmap can scan a network and determine what hosts are on that network. So the way that we would do that is first we would type in Nmap, and then that will be followed by all of our options for the actual scan. And the most important option of any scan is making sure that you are scanning the right thing. And so we identify what we want to scan using IP addresses or host name. So those are 2 basic ways. So if I want to scan an IP address, I just do Nmap followed by that IP address, or I could do Nmap followed by the host name. Now, to scan more than one IP address, or if you want to scan a whole network, you can use the dash to specify an actual range, or you can specify a subnet using CIDR notation. Now, if you don't know what CIDR notation is, don't worry too much about it. It looks like this, and they review it in TryHackMe if you go over all of their networking fundamental rooms, so check those out. But yeah, in this case, this would be equivalent to doing this, where you just specify the range yourself versus specifying the subnet. So if you don't understand subnets too well, you can always just use the dash and specify a range. So that's how the different ways that you can kind of format your target. And then they talk about the -SN option. So what does the -SN option do? So by default, Nmap does quite a few things. So when you type in -SN as an option, what you're doing is you're limiting Nmap, and you're saying, I don't want you to do everything. For now, I just want you to provide me with a list of hosts that are up in the given range, or I just want to know, is the host of this given IP address or host name up? So essentially what you're doing is it's kind of like a ping scan, okay? But it does a little bit more than a ping scan, and we'll get into that in a minute. So it's like a upgraded version of a ping scan. So you can use it if you want to figure out, I just want to know who is alive and running on the network. So that's what the -SN option does. They also let us know that in order to run Nmap with its full functionality, we do need to be running it as root, or every time we run it, we need to use sudo, because we need those elevated privileges because there's some functionality in Nmap that requires that. So that's important to note. If you don't understand what sudo and root means, or elevated privileges, or any of that, you need to check out the Linux fundamentals room from TryHackMe. They'll explain that in their little series, and it's really good. So if you don't know what that is, don't worry too much about it, but most of you should know at this point, and if you're doing this room, what root and sudo do. So yeah, so if we want Nmap to work fully, we got to be in elevated privileges. And then here they give us an example of Nmap running a scan on a local network. So we can see here, they do the -sn option, and then they use CIDR notation to scan that whole subnet. And then from the output, we can see we have the IP address that was scanned, whether or not it's up, so in this case it's up, and then it also provides us with the MAC address. Now Nmap is able to do that because it's on the local network, so it'll automatically get the MAC address for us. If we are not on the local network, like down here, this is pretty much the exact same scan, but instead of being on a local network, it's a remote network, and we only get the IP address and whether or not the host is actually up and running. So again, this is with the -sn option, so we're just for now looking at whether or not a host is there. So then down here, they give us some actual traffic, and we can see what Nmap is doing. So Nmap first, because we're running Nmap on .86 and we're scanning .1 and .2. So first it's going to send a ping request. Now here it gets a reply from .1. So it immediately knows, okay, .1 is up. Then it sends another ping request to .2 because it hasn't gotten a response. Then it sends a request to port 443 and port 80. Still doesn't get a response, and then it sends a timestamp request to .2, and then it does all of that again. And all of that is in an effort to try and determine whether or not .2 is actually up or whether it's not. So Nmap does quite a bit more for us than we probably even realized, and it's more advanced than just a regular ping scan. So keep that in mind. There's a lot going on in the background. So Nmap does a pretty good job of determining whether or not a host is actually up. And then down here, they give you some more advanced stuff. You can actually have more control over how Nmap discovers hosts, and they give you the options, but that's kind of out of the scope of this room, so I'm not going to focus too much on that. Then the last point that they kind of give us is this -SL option. So what that option does is it's just going to list the scan targets, right? So instead of actually scanning or doing anything, it literally just is going to give us a big list of everything that it would scan if we ran Nmap on those IP addresses. Now, why is that useful? It's useful because in cybersecurity, whether you're pen testing or troubleshooting, it's important that you know what you're scanning, because if you're scanning the wrong thing, that can have some serious consequences. So that's why it would be kind of useful, because it's always important to confirm what exactly it is that you're scanning. So then a little bit more on SN, so read through all that, start your machine, and then this question, what is the last IP address that will be scanned when your scan target is .1-27. So basically this has to do with subnetting. So if you don't know anything about subnets, again, I recommend you do the networking rooms from TryHackMe. I'll go through this really fast. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, then you got to check out the subnetting rooms from TryHackMe, or you can just Google subnetting and hopefully that can help you understand a little bit. But basically with this, what we're doing is, because it's -27, we know that the first 27 bits are fixed for the network. So that leaves us 5 bits for actual hosts. Then if we do some basic math, 2 to the power of 5, we realize that's 32 total IP addresses. And so we should be able to put 32. But 32 actually isn't the answer because one of those IP addresses is the network address. So we have to subtract 1 from that. And so instead of 32, we put 31 at the end. And that would be the last IP address scanned if this was your scan target. Okay, so hopefully that made some sense. If not, you got to learn more about subnetting, so check that out. And with that, we're done with task 2. Now it's on to task number 3, port scanning. So we already talked about -SN to discover actual hosts, but if we don't use that option, Nmap will automatically scan ports for us, and it'll try to determine what's going on with a given port. Now, this paragraph kind of explains how you could use Telnet to do that, but that would take a long time. It's pretty inefficient, so Nmap is the way to go. And then we're going to talk about the Connect scan. So Nmap has several different scans. They have some really advanced ones. We're going to talk just about the basic ones. So we're going to talk about the Connect scan, the SYN scan, and then we'll talk a little bit about a UDP scan, but the UDP scan is pretty straightforward. So the Connect scan, what is this? So what a Connect scan does is it establishes a full connection with the port that we are looking at. And we do a full Connect scan by doing the -ST flag. And this is what it looks like. So here, these first 3 are the full TCP handshake, right? So these first 3, SYN, SYNAC, ACK, starts the handshake. And then we immediately send a reset. So we want to end the conversation, and then those last 2, the conversation gets ended. Okay, so that's the breakdown here. So in this case, we make a full connection, hence why it's called the Connect scan. Now we can compare that to the SYN scan, which stands for stealth. And that gets marked or gets performed by using the -SS flag. What this looks like is we start that SYNAC, but instead of sending an ACK like we do up here, we immediately send the reset and we end the conversation prematurely. Now, why is it called a SYN scan? So generally speaking, this scan, because you make the full connection, there's usually more logging regarding this scan. So if I make a full connection to a port, there's a bit more logging that's going to be going on versus if I don't quite make a full connection. And so they say that right here. The advantage is that this is expected to lead to fewer logs as the connection is never fully established. And then we have the UDP scan. So we know these are both TCP scans. The UDP scan is going to function a little differently because with the UDP protocol, there's not as much confirmation or back and forth, right? It's more like we send information, and then after that, we don't really keep track or we don't worry too much about it. So some of the protocols or things that you might look for on UDP is DNS, DHCP, NTP, SNTP, and voice over IP. Because of that, it looks a lot different if we look at this traffic here. So to run an actual UDP scan, we use the -SU option. This is kind of what it looks like. It's a little bit different. I'm not going to go into too much detail just because if you read this, they don't really go into too much detail. But pretty much the UDP scan is just we're going to start sending information to all these different ports and see what happens, right? And there are settings where you can actually determine how long are you going to wait to see if anything comes back and stuff like that. So read through that. But yeah, more often than not, what you'll be using is this -SS scan because it's a little bit stealthier, and more often than not, you're going to want to be looking at TCP protocols like web servers or SSH or stuff like that. So keep that in mind. And then limiting the target ports. So by default, Nmap will scan the most common 1,000 ports. If we don't want that. We can do -F. That will be fast mode, which gives us the 100 most common ports. We can also specify a range, like here, or we can specify, in this case, this is all the ports between 1 and 25, right? Because we have that dash. Or if we wanted just one port, we could do -P space and then the port number. But because there's that dash right here, that's 1 through 25. And then we see the range here, and then if we want to scan all ports, we can do -P-, or you could write it out this way, but that's long, so just do this if you ever want to scan every single port. And there's like 65,000, so it'll take a while. And then down here we have a nice summary of the different types of scans and then how to do port ranges. So let's jump down to the questions. How many TCP ports are open on the target system at 10.10.5, 184? So let's Nmap, and then we'll paste that IP address, and we'll just run -F, get the most common 100, not Nmap, Nmap. So -F to get the most common ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, so there's 5 there. Nope, not correct. Okay, so I did the most common ones. So now let's do the most common 1000. So that'll just be an Nmap scan with no other options. Okay, we can see here we got some additional ones. So we got that 17 was added on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the right answer, 6 TCP ports. Find the listening web server on this IP and access it with your browser. What is the flag? Okay, so we can jump over here, open up Firefox. Okay, so now that we have this open, we can just paste in here that IP. And what they wanted was the web server. So if we look back at our terminal, oh wait, that opened up a new terminal. I don't want a new one. There we go. So if we open up our terminal, that's on port 8008. And so when you're using a URL, you do the colon and then 8008. And here is our flag. So we can copy that and paste it. And that's the right answer. So with that, we are done with task number 3. Now it's on to task number 4, version detection. Okay, so with this, it's pretty straightforward. The -O option is going to tell you the operating system that's actually running. So here it tells us that it's Linux that's running, right? So here they talk a little bit, you make sure you read through this, but like this isn't totally perfect when you use -O. It's not always going to give you the perfect OS. So that's why they kind of give you a range down here of like OS versions potentially. And sometimes these results aren't always super accurate. So with OS detection, it's good to use and it's good to have a really good educated guess as to what operating system you're scanning. However, it's not always totally 100% true. So keep that in mind, but still very useful. Then you have the -SV, and what this is service and version detection. So what this will do is it'll take a look. In this case, we have port 22 open. So if we look at our old scan, right, we have port 22, TCP open, SSH. That's the information that it gives us. Here, it goes as far as to give us the actual version. Okay, so that's what this is going to do. If you do the -SV option, it's going to try and get the version of each service for you. So that's really helpful. Then, if you want the -O and the -SV together, you can do -A. Now dash A is going to do more than just detect the operating system and service version. It does quite a few things, but it's kind of an all-in-one quick way to just scan something and get a good general overview. But something to keep in mind is it is very loud. Now what I mean by that is like you're going to be sending lots of requests to get all of this information. So if you have an intrusion detection system or something like that, it'll probably pick you up if you run the dash A option. So keep that in mind. But for things like capture the flag or doing a room in TryHackMe, or just to gain a greater understanding of any sort of machine, the dash A option is really great, and it'll run a lot of things for you automatically. And then the last thing they're going to talk about is forcing the scan. So sometimes when we do host discovery, like with the -SN, sometimes some hosts are up, but they won't respond to anything that Nmap is actually doing due to certain rules that are set on that host. Same thing if we run a SS scan, right? So a SYN scan. Even if we run that scan, sometimes certain things won't respond. And so what we can do is we can use the -PN option. And what this does is it will automatically assume everybody is up and running. Because if you run the -SS or any other sort of scan without using the -PN option, it will first do host discovery. So Nmap automatically does host discovery, then it does port scanning. So if we want to only do host discovery, that is the -SN option that we talked about earlier in the room. If we want to skip host discovery and only do port scanning and assume that everybody on the network is up and try all their ports, then we use the -PN option. So that's what that's for. And that's very useful because a lot of times things might appear to be down, but they're not actually down, and they do have open ports. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So now let's take a look here. What is the name and detected version of the web server running on 10.10.5.184? Okay, so I'm gonna hit the up arrow to get my last command, and then just type in the -SV option. And then we'll let that run for a second. Okay, so we got some results here. Output quite a bit of stuff. So we can see 8080 TCP, so that's our HTTP. And here it's this light TPD 14.74. So let's paste that. And I'm pretty sure there were no spaces in that formatting. Let's get rid of the space. Oh no, there was spaces in that formatting. It fixed it for me. Okay, so that's the answer to that. So you got to do the -SV option to get that answer. And with that, we're done with task 4. Now it's on to task 5. How fast is fast? Okay. So make sure you read through all this. I'm going to go over it pretty quick because it's pretty straightforward. And this graphic here really tells it all. So here we have timing. And what does this do? It determines how long a scan takes. So earlier I think I mentioned intrusion detection systems, right? So if I come in guns a-blazing with like T4, which is, so the -T flag stands for time, and then 0 through 4 is how quickly we want the scan to happen. So if I am scanning a network with -T4, it's going to be going super fast, right? So where's T4? Here's T3, right? So really fast. And an intrusion detection system will usually pretty easily recognize that and be like, oh my gosh, someone is scanning all of our ports, and then they'll flag it. Now, if I do the -T0, which is paranoid, what a scan that would take me 0.13 seconds would now take me 9.8 hours, because it's going to wait in between each request. So each packet that it sends, it's going to wait. And why would that be good? That's good because if you're scanning a network that has a lot of other traffic, because you're waiting that time, there's a chance that it gets just put in with all this other traffic, and then an intrusion detection system won't actually recognize it because it won't recognize the pattern, right? So here we can see the different times. So way more time between that, less time between these, less time, and then pretty darn fast here down at T3. And again, these are kind of the numbers and their equivalent. So T0 is paranoid, T1 is a little sneaky, and then T2 is very polite. So if you have something if you're like running on a network that's kind of slow or something, or scanning a slow network, sometimes it's nice to go a little bit slower so you don't overwhelm it. And then you have T3, which is normal. So this is the default for Nmap. And then you have T4, which is aggressive. So that'll go pretty much as fast as Nmap can go. Another thing that you can do is you can set the number of parallel service probes. So what that means is Nmap can send multiple packets at one time. And so you can actually set that number. If you want Nmap to be sending a bunch of packets at once, it'll do that. But again, that can overwhelm some networks. Or you could set it to just one, and then it'll be sending one packet at a time. It won't do any probes simultaneously. So by default, Nmap will automatically control this number. So if the network is not great, Nmap will tone it down for you automatically. If the network is really good, then Nmap will up the number so that your scan is quicker. Then same thing down here, you have this rate. So --min-rate, and then followed by the number. And you have the min and the max. And this can control the rate at which Nmap sends packets. So if you want it to send slowly, you can. If you want it to send super fast, you can. And the rate is done in seconds per packet, right? So if I want 1 packet per second, at the minimum, I would say --min-rate 1. And that would give me 1 packet per second at least. Okay, so it could go faster. So if you set both your minimum rate and your maximum rate, then you can really dial in what speed you want Nmap to go at. Then the last option that they cover is host timeout. So this is the maximum time that you are willing to wait to see if a host is gonna respond, right? So again, on slow networks, you may want to wait a bit longer. On really fast networks, you shouldn't have to wait that long because they should just respond super quickly. But all of these are customizable. So again, you can get very detailed with how much you want to customize Nmap scans. So what is the non-numeric equivalent of T4? That would be aggressive, but not aggressive with 3 G's. So that's the non-numeric equivalent of -T4. That would be -T aggressive. So again, in Nmap, you can either use the number, which is what most people do because it's just easier, or you could actually type the word associated with it. So paranoid, sneaky, polite, and so on. So with that, we're done with task 5. Now it's on to task number 6, output control. So pretty much what they're going to talk about here is they're going to talk about verbosity and debugging. So Nmap generally, for the most part, is going to by default give you the information that you need. However, if you want more information, you can use the -V option, and that'll print a lot more. So here we can see it with the -V option. So it goes through quite a bit more details and actually tells you, quite a bit of what's going on. Now, if that's not enough for you, you can go all the way up to -V, or you can use numbers. So you can do -V2 or -V4, whichever one you prefer. But yeah, the more V's, the more information that Nmap is going to give you. And then if that's still not enough, you can actually get all the debugging level output from Nmap, which is super detailed. And that goes -D, and you can go all the way up to the number 9. Now, if you do that, I doubt that anybody hardly ever does, but if you did, that would be just so much information. So keep that in mind. But this is how we can increase the output and detail of what Nmap is actually feeding us using the -V option. And for the most part, that's what you'll be using. Very few people are probably going to want this debugging level output, but if you do, this is how you get it. So keep that in mind. Now, saving a scan report. So there's different formats that we can save Nmap output in. We can save it as normal output, so that would be like a text file, just like normal. The way that we see it is how it would save it. You have XML output, and you have greppable output. Okay, so those all look a little bit differently. They're used for different things, and it's pretty easy to remember because it's -ON for normal, -OX for XML, -OG for greppable, and if you want all the file formats, then you can just do -OA with the base name. And that's what they do right here. They do that -OA and they name it gateway. And so then they get gateway.gnmap, which stands for greppable, gateway.nmap, and gateway.xml. So they get all three when you do this -OA option. So that's important because as you get more advanced with Nmap and stuff, you may want to, manipulate the output so that you could feed it into another program or whatever you might need that for. So that's how you do that. Now let's go down to the questions. What options must you add to your Nmap command to enable debugging? That should be -D, pretty straightforward. So with that, we are done with task number 6. Now it's on to task number 7, the conclusion. So they're just going to give us a quick summary, kind of all the things we mentioned. Make sure you read through it. Make sure you're doing sudo or you're running as root when you use Nmap to get the most out of it. And then here is a great little chart of all the different options we went over and what they are. And then let's take a look at this. What kind of scan will Nmap use if you run Nmap 1010 with local user privileges? Okay, so because of the question, I'll dive into this a bit more. So Nmap, like we said, it wants to use, or you should use sudo privileges or be root when you're using Nmap. Why? Because Nmap wants to automatically use SynScan because it's just a better scan. And it will do that if you're running with sudo privileges. However, if you're not running with sudo privileges, if you're running as a local user, it will do a full connect scan, which is not as sneaky. So we like to use the more sneaky, the bit more, SynScan is just a better scan because we're not producing, again, like we talked about earlier, all those logs, or we shouldn't be producing as many. So that's just one example of why it's important to use elevated privileges. There are other functions that Nmap has that require elevated privileges. In this case, you need elevated privileges because crafting SynScan these specific packets requires those privileges. So back down to the question, what kind of scan will Nmap use if you run this with local user privileges? That would be a connect scan, if I can spell. So a connect scan. And if we put that in, we're done with that. Hopefully you guys found the video helpful. If you did, give it a like and subscribe. That helps me out a lot. And with that, you have finished the Nmap the Basics room from TryHackMe.